Good evening. I'm Albert Kreinersale, Dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government and Provost of Harvard University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening. And what I'm welcoming you to is this year's Spring Symposium. It's called In Pursuit of the American Spirit, Politics, Policy, and Change. And the title of this symposium reflects a degree of reverence and respect for the very notion of change. Now, the mission of the Kennedy School is to prepare leaders for public service in government and in other institutions in democratic societies, and to contribute to the solution of public problems. An achievement of this mission requires real attention to a rule articulated long ago by United States Senator Margaret Chase Smith. Senator Smith said, and I quote, "Before you can become a statesman, you first have to get elected." And to get elected, she said, you have to be a politician, pledging your support for what the voters want. Now, the late Senator Smith was able to say this because, without being viewed as cynical, because she was well respected for her professional accomplishments and her personal commitment to her ideals. Our keynote speaker tonight has certainly demonstrated this dual quality of service and independence. Indeed, in a very noisy political landscape, he has articulated a clear and consistent set of personal beliefs, not always completely in harmony with his constituents or with his party. Arlen Specter was born in Wichita, Kansas, and was graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. He enlisted in the Air Force during the Korean War, and later earned a degree from Yale Law School, which I'm told is in New Haven, Connecticut. He began his public service career as an assistant district attorney in Philadelphia, and later was elected to 2 terms as district attorney. First elected to the United States Senate in 1980, he's worked hard for his Pennsylvania constituents and more broadly for labor and farmers, for the elderly, for the very young, and for civil rights. Senator Specter is chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence and of the Judiciary Committee's subcommittee on terrorism, technology, and government information. This focus on terrorism is, of course, terribly important following the horrible bombing in Oklahoma City last week. He's also a member of the Appropriations and Veterans Affairs Committees. And as if those responsibilities weren't enough, he has set his sights on another, even more demanding set of responsibility when he announced his candidacy for the Republican nomination for the presidency of the United States. Now, it's just a short drive from Cambridge to New Hampshire and to Maine, but I doubt that that had any bearing on Senator Specter's willingness to be with us tonight. In any event, we're fortunate and grateful to have him. So please join me in welcoming the Honorable Arlen Specter.
Thank you very much, Dean, for those very generous words of introduction. I hadn't intended to talk about the ratings of the law schools, Yale and Harvard in that order necessarily, until that comment was made about New Haven. When the Dean made a comment that I am not always in touch with the views of my constituents, he's not right. I can always find at least 2 Pennsylvanians who agree with me. Sometimes not much more than that, to put it in the plural. And when the comment is made about Senator Margaret Chase Smith, certainly an illustrious senator, about becoming a statesman and the necessity to first be elected, and before that you have to be a politician, it brings to mind the most famous definition of a statesman: a dead politician. And the way Washington works today, I think that is exactly right. I don't think there are any living who are regarded as statesmen or stateswomen. That is a part of the problem that I'm going to talk to you about this evening. I was told by the dean that I'd be invited back in the fall when the presidential candidates were to be invited. I thought that's why I was here tonight. But I was told that I'd get at least 100 volunteers. So I'm counting on those 100 here this evening. This campaign has already started. The events of the last 10 days, moving through our hearings before the Judiciary Subcommittee on Terrorism yesterday, Thursday, and the hearing on the confirmation of John Deutsch on Wednesday in the Intelligence Committee, have made this a very erudite speech. I can represent it to you as erudite since you're not going to hear it. Has made this speech, whether it's erudite or not, really out of date, because there have been so many developments on the subject that I want to discuss with you. And I begin with the Oklahoma City bombing. And I think that America will never be the same because of the magnitude of the casualties, expected to exceed 200, because it is an event where, based on everything we know today, that it is a United States citizen who has acted against others of his fellow citizens. I think the impact would have been terrible, whoever the culprit or culprits were, but I think there is a special degree of problem when it's one of our own who appears to have done the act, and I still regard it as an allegation only in accordance with the presumption of innocence. And then it hit the heartland of America, which somehow is different. It may be that I have a special concern, being born and raised in Kansas, and having attended the University of Oklahoma in Norman, only 20 miles from Oklahoma City, and knowing the scene so very well as to what happened. And I think that the Oklahoma City bombing has magnified the focus of dissension and hatred and violence in America. And the voices from the rubble have proclaimed in the voice of dissension and disagreement that it was a Rembrandt in terms of a bombing. And Colonel Olson of the military militia on television tells us that he can understand why the terrorism occurred, and I cannot understand how Colonel Olson of the military militia can understand that. And I believe that this is a part of a pattern of violence which exists in America today. And it may be that it is a complex continuum, beginning with the exercise of freedom of speech and going all the way through the conduct of violence. Or maybe it's not a continuum. We are considering matters now to try to respond to these acts of terrorism. The President has sent forward a list of legislative proposals. Some of them I agree with, some of them I disagree with, and some of his existing policies I have concerns about. I do not think that we can have secret proceedings when we talk about deporting people in the United States. The FBI tells us that the information is too sensitive to be disclosed, but I do not believe that you can have a secret proceeding consistent with the constitutional right of confrontation. And we are searching for a way to deal with suspected terrorists without violating constitutional rights, and I think we can. I think what we need to do is to identify the terrorists who are here illegally and deport them, not because they are terrorists, but because they are here illegally. And we cannot deport all of those who are here illegally, but we can target those who are problems. We can change the laws in terms of preventive detention. That is legal for a relatively brief period of time. we can expedite the procedures and we can get the job done. I think we cannot talk about a terrorist list and deny fundraising potential, which we've had a lot of objections to on the concerns about the First Amendment freedom of association. And when the President came forward with more proposals for roving wiretaps, that again I think has grave constitutional implications. We have had the debate, somewhat lusty so far, about the Attorney General's guidelines. And here I think the shoe is on the other foot. Here I think the administration is not undertaking the kind of law enforcement activities that are well within the constitutional ambit. It is not necessary constitutionally to have an indication of a crime before you can have an investigation. The situation with, again, the Michigan militia, and I do not suggest that they had anything to do with the Oklahoma City bombing, but there on national television we see people in uniform, people with guns, people training, all within their constitutional rights. But when their leader, Commander Olson, appears on national television and beyond saying that he understands why there is a bombing, talks about rebellion, and talks about violence, I think there is more than sufficient cause to have an investigation. And you can have law enforcement with surveillance. You can have law enforcement where someone seeks to join an organization. They don't have to let the person join. They can observe what is going on. And I think there is a fundamental difference, really an enormous difference, where the Justice Department has been timid, I think, because of the experiences of the FBI in the past where they were dealing with political organizations. And we saw that in the Intelligence Committee investigation not too recently on CISPAs, where the Salvadorans, where there was intimidation and pressure against a lawful organization. But when guns are involved and the potential for violence is present, then I think that it is an entirely different matter. And yesterday in our hearings, we had a little change in position by the Deputy Attorney General, saying that, well, perhaps the guidelines had been too restrictively interpreted. And we had a number of experts testify about how the FBI agents complained about not even being able to go into public meetings or collate materials that were in the public press. And we're going to be considering that, and if there's not a change in administration policy, then it may be a matter for the Congress to consider. We have these Mayhem Manuals, which are available describing how to make bombs, and Internet. Shortly after the Oklahoma City bombing, published the entire dossier as to how to recreate the kind of a bomb which was used in Oklahoma City. And that puts us to the test. We've had some judicial authority that you cannot distribute information about how to make a nuclear bomb. Well, we're going to have to consider the dissemination of that kind of information. And I believe that when we deal with the First Amendment and freedom of expression, we have to err on the side of constitutional rights. But is it an idea which is being transmitted? Or is it not within the ambit of First Amendment protection? Harvard's own Oliver Wendell Holmes said it best in the landmark cases about the limits of freedom of speech, articulated the values of speech more eloquently than any justice has or anyone else has in the history of the Republic, but left an ambit where you have a clear and present danger that you could take up the issues of governmental reaction, that there are limits. You can't fire in a crowded theater, and we're going to have to examine these Mayhem Manuals to see what is an appropriate response. There's more than the violence of terrorism. There's the pattern of violence that we see on the abortion clinics. And less than 4 months ago, in nearby Brookline, Massachusetts, December 30th, there were 2 murders. And you have Randall Terry, the founder of Operation Rescue, who put it this way, quote, "I want you to just let a wave of intolerance wash over you. I want you to let a wave of hatred wash over you. Yes, hate is good. Our goal is a Christian nation, and we have a biblical duty. We are called by God to conquer this country. We don't want equal time. We don't want pluralism." And you have the situation with the publication of a law review article by a student at Pat Robertson's law school, where Michael Griffin, a student, talked about a justifiable homicide in a law review article about to be published in the Regent University Law Review, Pat Robertson School in Virginia Beach, saying that there was justifiable homicide in the killing of Dr. Gunn in a Florida abortion clinic. And just as the article was about to be published, there was another murder of a Dr. Britton and a security guard. And Michael Griffin had represented the man then accused and later convicted of that abortion killing on a matter of harassing abortion clinic workers, and it was brought back. And I think what we have to focus on in the continuum of activity here, the exercise of First Amendment freedoms. And when the dean made reference to some of my views, which I've expressed in the political context, I'm very much concerned about what has been articulated by Pat Buchanan, and I have not been indirect about it. Dan Quayle wrote in his book that the 1992 Republican convention was very divisive and very badly hurt the Republican ticket, and who would know better than a man who was half of the ticket? Pat Buchanan fires back and says Quayle is wrong, that we're engaged in a holy war. And at the Texas Republican Convention last June, they hold up big signs, a vote for our candidate is a vote for God. And that's out of line. That is really sacrilegious. And Pat Robertson, a man whom I have known since law school days, says there's no constitutional doctrine of the separation of church and state, and that it is a lie of the left. And his spokesman, Ralph Reed, says that if you're pro-choice, you're disqualified from being the Republican nominee for president. And we're talking here about what is really a fringe. The fringe is a 5% factor, which I quantify by my own experience. In 1992, faced a tough election, primary, won, pulled the party together, and one of Pat Robertson's people filed a third-party candidacy, got 5% of the vote, ordinarily enough to defeat a Republican candidate in Pennsylvania. And it's not the tail wagging the dog. 71% of Republicans support a woman's right to choose. It is really the tip of the tail wagging the dog. And President Kennedy spoke out this week in rather strong terms, calling about and protesting the loud and angry President Clinton spoke out. Well, you see, I like this comment by President Clinton, and apparently I didn't want to attribute it to him. I wanted to. But this was President Clinton, and every now and then I do agree with him, and if somebody wants to raise a Q&A about some of the times that I've helped him, I'd be glad to talk about that too, even though it's going to be on C-SPAN, and a lot of Republicans will be watching it. But he spoke out in forceful terms, denouncing the loud and angry voices, talking about the use of the nation's airwaves to keep some people as paranoid as possible and the rest of us all torn up and upset with each other. They spread hate. They leave the impression that by their very words that violence is acceptable. It's time we all stood up and spoke against that kind of reckless speech and behavior. And I applaud that comment by President Clinton. Sounds like he's describing what I've been trying to do for the past year and a half in taking on Robertson, Reed, and Buchanan. And then others spoke up. The talk radio hosts were very critical of President Clinton for having said that. And I think that they have standing too. And let's have the lusty debate, but let's have it in civilized tones. Let's have it where we do not raise the decibels so loudly that we drown each other out. And I think when we talk of religious freedom, especially here in the John F. Kennedy School, it is worth noting his very cogent statement in his book, A Nation of Immigrants, where he commented that the search for freedom of worship has brought people to America from the days of the Pilgrims to modern times. The insistence of each wave of immigrants upon its right to practice its religion helped make freedom of worship a central part of the American creed. People who gambled their lives on the right to believe in their own God would not lightly surrender that right to a new society. And yet we have the voices speaking out that we should not be a pluralistic society, speaking out on intolerance, and starting what may be a chain reaction. And they have a right to their speech, but we have a duty, I think, to stand up and speak out very forcefully against that. And President Kennedy visited the home of his great-grandfather, Patrick Kennedy, in 1963 and made this statement, that his great-grandfather, in coming to the United States, carried nothing with him except a strong religious faith and a strong desire for religious liberty. If he hadn't left, I, said President Kennedy, would be working at the Albatross Company across the road. And I very much associate with that because my father, Harry Specter, came to this country from Ukraine in 1911, walked across Europe with barely a ruble in his pocket, sailed steerage, came to the United States to make a better life for himself and his family to be. He didn't know it, but he had a return ticket to France, not to Paris, but to the Argonne Forest, where he suffered a disabling wound for the service of his country. And my mother came to this country with her family at the age of 5. In the early 1900s, my parents came here looking for religious freedom, just as the Pilgrims did 300 years earlier, coming in the early 1600s. And today we have our work cut out for us in terms of standing up in a political context and of speaking out against the voices of hatred and against the voices of violence. And when they cross the line, there is no doubt about the authority in a civilized and law-abiding society to take action against them. And what we are going to be doing in the course of the next several weeks in Washington is try to make the very, very complex judgments as to where the freedom of expression ends and where it is appropriate to conduct a surveillance or an infiltration in the interests of democracy. Yesterday, we had a very distinguished group of experts testifying before the Judiciary Committee. If you didn't see it yesterday, you'll see it on C-SPAN probably right after you see this speech. And Brian Jenkins, one of the participants, warned about the impending violence with the militia around the country and said that democracy will not act until there is enough blood in the streets. And I don't think that has to be the result. And one of the most liberal of United States senators yesterday said during the course of the hearings that the vote that she would cast was going to be for everything. And one of my colleagues leaned over and said, well, why conduct the hearings any further? But that's a sentiment. And one of the very conservative senators said he wasn't about to support the legislation which had been introduced because he was concerned about the rights of people who were bearing arms in our society. So you see the very, very different balance of power, balance of terror, balance of authority, and balance of concern. Well, I know that a good part of our program is devoted to questions and answers, and I'm delighted to yield at this time to you, Dean, for that portion of the program.
Let me point out to people there is a microphone here, and there's one up there and one there. So if people would come to the microphones if you have a question, identify yourself briefly, and then start with a question so we can start here. I'll save mine.
Senator Specter, my name is William Zerhouni, and I'm with the Harvard-Radcliffe Republican Alliance. And before I ask you my question, I would like to apologize on behalf of the Alliance and on behalf of Republicans everywhere for some of the treatment you have received tonight, whether you have seen it or not. I think that there is room in this party for people who are pro-choice and for people who are pro-life to work together, and there's no reason that we should be bashing each other over the head as Republicans. And that really heads to my question. My question is, how can more social libertarian Republicans and more socially conservative Republicans come together, both pro-choice and pro-life, to work together to elect a Republican in 1996 without a lot of the division that we have seen previously, especially in 1992?
I believe that the Republican convention in 1992 showed the divisiveness of the anti-abortion plank, which wants to criminalize abortion, which is totally out of line. And it's not just Roe versus Wade. It's Casey versus Planned Parenthood, an opinion written by three justices appointed by Republican presidents, Justice Souter, Justice O'Connor, and Justice Anthony Kennedy. And what I want to do is I want to take abortion out of politics. I'm not looking for a pro-choice plank. I'm looking for language which would respect human life, but would also respect the diversity of opinion. And there is nothing in the contract with America about abortion or about school prayer. And we have a great deal of very heavy lifting ahead of us, hard work in trying to work toward a balanced budget by the year 2002, and in dealing with terrorism legislation, and in dealing with some very, very difficult foreign policy issues. And if we are sidetracked on an aggressive social agenda, we will not get done our other work. And what I would like to see done as a Republican, that we concentrate on core Republican values, smaller government, less expenditures, lower taxes, strong national defense, and effective crime control. And that means taking out of politics and out of the campaign these divisive issues.
And do you believe, though, that pro-choice and pro-life Republicans can come together, or is this something that's going to split us apart?
Well, I have no doubt that we can come together. I worked very hard for the election of Senator Rick Santorum last year. Rick is pro-life, I'm pro-choice. But we agree on 85–90% of the issues, and I think that's what we have to do, both for the party and for the country.
Thank you.
Hi, Senator Specter. My name is David Yarkin. I'm a senior at Harvard-Radcliffe, and although I'm a Democrat, I do salute you for taking on the religious right. I think it's a very courageous move on your part, and you're definitely to be applauded for it. Although you say you want to take abortion out of politics or out of this campaign, it certainly does provide you with a very politically, a nice niche politically in the Republican primary. Would a Wilson candidacy affect your strategy?
No. I've expected Governor Wilson to be in the race, and his participation will not affect my strategy, and for a number of reasons. One, I think that Governor Wilson's going to have some trouble with the $8 billion in taxes that he imposed in California. I think it's also a late entry. And I have not seen the governor show any inclination to really take on the tough issue of where we are with the fringe. And I'm the only really pro-choice candidate in the field, and I will be that even when Governor Wilson comes into the field. If you take a look at his voting record, he has not been pro-choice on the really tough questions. There was an amendment pending in the mid-'80s which would call for federal funding for a woman in a federal prison who was raped and became pregnant as a result of that rape, and Governor Wilson voted against it. We had a vote on a medical program for federal employees with an abortion option where the employees paid for it. And Senator Wilson then voted against it, as he voted in favor of parental consent. And I believe that there is a direct link between taking on Pat Buchanan's call for a holy war and Pat Robertson's insistence that there's no constitutional doctrine of separation of church and state and calling for a Christian nation, and Ralph Reed's statement that if you're pro-choice you can't be the Republican nominee, and in really moving to the core of this issue. And so far, I'm the only one who's been willing to do it, and I think that will remain after Governor Wilson enters the campaign.
If I could follow up, what do you make of Governor Weld's support for Governor Wilson on the grounds of social moderation, if you are the more true pro-choice candidate?
Well, I think that Governor Weld is a terrific guy, and worked with him very closely when he was Assistant Attorney General and I was on the Judiciary Committee, and have a great respect for what he's done here in Massachusetts. But everybody makes a mistake now and then.
Thanks.
Right up here. You see that?
Senator Specter,
Yes.
you've called for a return to core Republican principles and for a return to the party of Lincoln, I think you've said. Yet you must be aware that in the first Republican Party platform, there was only one plank, not about small government or reduced taxation, but a plank on the most divisive issue, certainly, that this country has ever faced, the issue of slavery. The Republican Party has always taken a stand on principle. The election of the Reagan years and the last election in 1994 shows us the Republicans win when they take a stand on principle. Now, Senator Specter, I'd like to know what you have to do with great Republicans like President Lincoln who have taken a stand on moral principle. What are you going to say about the lives of the unborn?
I'm going to say that my entire political career has been based upon principle, and that we have a Supreme Court of the United States which makes decisions about what due process means, and the Supreme Court has spoken. Has spoken Roe versus Wade and spoken Casey versus Planned Parenthood, an opinion, as I said earlier, written by 3 justices appointed by Republican presidents, and I think that's the law of the land, and I stand on that principle.
Would you stand on Dred Scott?
I would not stand on Dred Scott, but I don't think there's any comparison between the Dred Scott decision and Casey versus Planned Parenthood, and I'd be glad to debate you on that in some way.
Right here.
Barbara Bernstein I'm a registered Republican from Connecticut. I have 2 questions, Senator Specter. The Republicans in the last election ran a very mean-spirited campaign. They attacked the president even though it was not a presidential election. Don't you feel that the Republicans, even though they want the presidency in the next election, are weakening the office by attacking the presidency all the time? His foreign policy, no matter what he says, is attacked in the Senate, in the House. And the other question I have is, now that you have had the opportunity to reflect upon your attitude, your questioning and handling of Anita Hill during the Clarence Thomas hearings, do you have any regrets?
Let me take your second question first. It's drawn the most response here in the audience. I successfully overcame the problem which I had from the questioning of Professor Anita Hill in my re-election in 1992 for a couple of reasons. One is I say candidly that it was a learning experience for me, and I think a learning experience for the country. I had no idea how much sexual harassment there was until after those hearings were over, and I heard so many women tell me how painful they found the proceeding, and that they knew they had been sexually harassed and almost felt by transference that they were sitting in Professor Anita Hill's place. And I told them that that was not what we had intended, and I reminded them that on that Sunday afternoon that turned into 2 a.m. Monday morning that I was the guy who stood up and said we needed more time. We'd been given 1 week by the Senate to conduct those hearings, and I think we should have taken more time. And I overcame it also because of the very strong record I have on women's issues. I've consistently been against the glass ceiling, comparable pay for comparable work, pro-choice. Along with Senator Tom Harkin, worked to bring in a separate unit in the National Institute of Health because women's health issues are different. And today, many of the people who opposed what I did in those hearings, like Kate Michelman, president of NARAL, supporting what I'm doing because I'm taking on the battle of the clinics, the health clinics, which have abortion only a small percent of the time. And long before it became a national cause, I was a leader on more research money for breast cancer. So I think that The issue of the Hill-Thomas hearings, I think, will be okay once the people of America know as much about my record as the people of Pennsylvania did. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment on C-SPAN. As to the first part of your question about the campaign being mean and nasty, I haven't seen one that wasn't, frankly. And I think it's very regrettable when you have the negative ads and the kinds of attacks which we have in campaigns. And I have to tell you, they're not limited to attacks by Republicans against Democrats or attacks by Republicans against the president. And Republicans have stood up and have complimented the president when we think the facts warrant it. Republicans have praised the president's policy in the Mideast, for example, and what Secretary of State Warren Christopher has done. It was a tough day for me on September 13th, 1993, to see Arafat honored at the White House. But when the Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister Rabin, shook his hands, and the Israelis had been the most affected by PLO terrorism, that was it. And we complimented the president on what he had done. But I'm not prepared to compliment the president on what he did in Somalia when he went to nation building, or his plans to invade Haiti, which does not involve a vital U.S. interest, or the agreement he's made with the North Koreans, giving them 5 years window to develop nuclear bombs, when it's really a treaty that ought to come before the Senate. But where I could help the president, I did on the crime bill. And I think the kind of an analysis which we have is appropriate in a democracy. And even before your question, I praised him on his statement for civility in political debate.
Sir, you didn't answer either of my questions.
Well, I think both were addressed.
Senator Specter, hi, my name is Oren Kerr. I'm a student in the law school here. As a fellow Jewish Republican, I'm concerned about your relationship with religious conservatives within the party, and in particular with Christian conservatives in the party. And my concern really is that you may be exploiting some of the divisions within the party in a way that will divide the GOP rather than unite it. What can you tell me about your views and your attitudes about religious conservatives in the party that can address my concerns?
Well, I am very careful never to criticize the Christian coalition or the religious right, because I believe that there's a very important place in public life for people with deep religious and moral convictions, and I'm one myself. When you take a look at the teenage pregnancy or the crime rate or the fact that so many high school seniors who graduate can't even read their own diplomas, there's obviously a need for people with deep religious and moral convictions. But it is not Christian or religious or Judeo-Christian to say to pro-choice Republicans, if you don't agree, you don't belong. That is fringe talk. That is intolerance. Or to say that a vote for our candidate is a vote for God. And I think that President Bush and Vice President Quayle lost the election in significant part in 1992 to the anti-abortion flag. And I didn't put it there. And I've been trying to take it out. And I've talked to Haley Barbour, the National Republican Chairman, and to my colleagues in the Senate in an effort to try to unite the Republican Party. But beyond the Republican Party, beyond talking about the soul of the Republican Party, we're talking about the soul of America. And I think these are very important issues. And I'm running a campaign for the presidency on very constructive ideas to balance the budget, to move for a flat tax, which would be pro-growth, working on the health issue with not only a critique of the Clinton program with a chart that I had developed, but positive programs for targeting the problems. And in the education field, where I'm chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee, trying to move toward privatization, and the foreign policy experience I've had from the Intelligence Committee on weapons of mass destruction as well as terrorism, and cutting violent crime from the experience I've had as District Attorney of Philadelphia. You may not read about the positive planks that I'm coming forward with because there's more attention on something which is controversial. But I have a plan for America. I think I have the ideas and the experience and the energy to provide leadership for this country into the 21st century. And as we've seen the problems of terrorism and the need for balance, protecting public safety as well as constitutional rights, I think there have been a fair number of comments about my contribution in the course of the past week, 10 days. Who's got an easy question?
I don't know if it's easy. Dan Berger from Philadelphia. I also want to pay my respects to you, Senator, for speaking out against the extreme fringe. In the 1950s, the extreme left talked about violent overthrow of the U.S. Constitution, and in the 90s, we have the extreme right talking about violent overthrow of the U.S. Constitution. But I'd like to ask a slightly different question, and that is this. This country has a number of problems on an across-the-board basis, and government at all levels is seemingly and increasingly incapable of solving these problems. How do we get the leadership to make better policy choices, and how can we ensure that the leadership can overcome this seeming paralysis to address real issues and come up with solutions?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think part of the answer is to make sure they come to the Kennedy School of Government and face the kinds of questions which you're asking here. And I think there also needs to be a focus on the big issues of education and health care and foreign policy, as opposed to how much money has been raised. And I think our leaders have to be prepared to admit mistakes when mistakes have been made. And we're looking at a time in our history where there's a whole aura of discontent. And you talk about let a wave of hate wash over you, as Randolph Terry does, and he has a right to speak. And I don't think that's inciting to criminal conduct, but it certainly doesn't help any. And I think that we have yet to really discuss in appropriate detail Waco. I think that there were some serious mistakes made in Waco, and I've said so publicly before. And I think that when the Attorney General talked about children being abused and later conceded that she was wrong, and talked about the condition of the law enforcement officials there being strung out, and later conceded that she was wrong about that, I think when we make mistakes, we have to comment about it. And there's a lot of discontent about the Weaver case, and I think there's never been an airing of the details. We know that Mrs. Weaver was shot holding a baby in her arms, but there's not been the explanation which some have offered, or the kind of an inquiry. And whether it's a full story or not, I don't know, but it hasn't been told about the man with the rifle in the Weaver household who was menacing the helicopter, the FBI helicopter flying overhead, and when the sharpshooter was aiming at that person, he was running back in and slammed the door, and the bullet went through the door and shot and killed Mrs. Weaver. But I think we have to address problems where the government has made an error, or where there are issues to be confronted. And there has to be an investigation of government misconduct at all levels. And I think that would reinstate public confidence in what we're doing in government.
Hi, Senator Specter.
Yes, sir.
My name is Mark Barker. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Harvard Peninsula, which is a conservative publication on campus. And I thought that some of the comments you made tied in with actually the back cover of our issue, and I wondered what your reaction would be. It says, Winston Churchill, intolerant of Hitler; Martin Luther King, intolerant of segregation; Lech Walesa, intolerant of communism; Amy Carmichael, intolerant of child prostitution. And I wonder if you think that these instances of intolerance are also invalid. And by the way, these are quotes from Randall Terry, who you were evidently taking out of context, but I wonder what your reaction would be to that. And the second, speaking of, obviously I think we can agree on nonviolence. I think that this is crucial. I was glad to see your remarks regarding the terrible tragedy in Oklahoma. What do you think of the disruption, the prevention of non-disruptive free speech that has taken place here tonight?
Well, I don't know the details of the non-disruptive free speech taking place here tonight. But if somebody has protested my views or my ideas, as long as it's peaceful, that's fine. I think, what did happen? Tell me, so I can make an intelligent response to the question.
There was a sign up that we put up which said the Republican Party, the party for the unborn. We put up 2 signs, and we also said pro-life wins election. Wins elections. There was another sign over there, which we were immediately, even though we did it quietly, we had to take them down immediately.
I'll take responsibility
Okay.
for that. We don't We also don't have advertisements for gas stations.
It's
Well, I think the dean has the right to his position. I would have left the signs up. They wouldn't bother me a bit.
Thank you.
When you talk about intolerance of where Churchill has stood and where Martin Luther King has stood, I think the word intolerance is used incorrectly. I think they have stood for principles against the unprincipled. And I don't think you can say that about Randall Terry. When he talks about a wave of intolerance wash over you, a wave of hatred wash over you, he's the founder of Operation Rescue, saying that hate is good. That's not out of context. That's directly in context. And I don't think how anybody, well, you're entitled to your own opinions, but I'd put that to a vote among Republicans, and I think we'd win 99.44.
Hi, my name's Carolyn Baker. I'm a Harvard undergrad. I was very impressed with your stance. You came out against violence, and I just think that's excellent because obviously, we are seeing a resurgence of violence in our country today. But you also struck me as very hypocritical in that you supported the violence that kills 1.6 million babies every year, and I can't help but see.
No, let her speak. Let her speak.
It upsets me, I'm sorry, because I can't help but see how you can justify killing all those innocent children when you're so against violence. It just doesn't make sense, and I don't understand. I don't understand how you justify that.
Well, the position. Listen, I understand. When these issues are discussed any place, there is applause on both sides, and I'm prepared for that, and I'm prepared to tell you why I stand where I stand. Those issues have been very contentious in our society, and we live in a system of the rule of law, and those matters have been decided by the highest court in the country, and I think they are a statement of the right of a woman to choose. And there is a consideration for what the due process of law means, and I think those are correct decisions.
Senator Specter, my name is Eric Pitchell. I'm a graduate
Yes.
of Brown University and I'm entering Yale Law School in the fall.
Next question.
Give you two questions.
You alluded earlier to your religious faith, and I was wondering if you could speak a bit more specifically about what being Jewish means to you and to what extent you plan, if any, to take on Pat Robertson's alleged anti-Semitism as has been outlined by Frank Rich in the New York Times in the last few weeks.
Well, I am not prepared to come to conclusions which are not absolutely conclusive. I'm not going to take on Pat Robertson on that issue because I think that there is room for argument about it. Unlike his statement that there's no constitutional doctrine of separation of church and state, which is not Arlen Specter's position, that's Thomas Jefferson's position. So I have no doubt about that. And I'm going to try to maintain my debate with Pat Robertson on the highest level I can in terms of principle, with not raising the decibel level or getting involved in anything that is not conclusive. What does being Jewish mean to me? It meant that when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, going to school in Wichita, Kansas, and there was religious prayer, that it was uncomfortable, that it was, if not intimidating, close to it. And I got called into President Reagan's Oval Office one day. You know those two big chairs where they have King Hussein sitting with the president or Gorbachev sitting with the president? Well, I got to sit in one of those big chairs. in the mid-'80s when we were taking up school prayer, and President Reagan and I traded experiences about his going to school in Illinois and my going to school in Kansas. And there'll be a mezuzah on the White House because there is that freedom of choice. And I'm frequently asked, is America ready for a Jewish president? And I think America is. I think that Americans evaluate people on their individual worth. And just as John F. Kennedy faced the problem or the issue 35 years ago and was the first Catholic president, we talk about General Powell as a possible presidential candidate, and nobody says he's disqualified because he's African American. So when people ask me the question, is America ready for a Jewish president, I say yes. And then I say if America isn't, America should be. And if the answers to both those questions are no, then damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. I'm going to try.
Senator Specter, my name is Sean Pierce. I'm a Harvard undergrad. I'm very enthusiastic about your flat tax proposal, but the media haven't reported a lot of the details, and I was wondering if you could set those out, like what the rate would be, if you'd preserve any exemptions, whether capital gains would face taxation, things like that.
Well, thank you very much for that question. Bring up the charts, Charlie. Here's the Arlen Specter tax return. It's a postcard, and it is fashioned. And here we're going to open up a big postcard. Here it is, so C-SPAN can give the proper emphasis on campaign publicity to promote my candidacy for president. It is 20% flat. It reduces, it is a negative 20%. Whatever your income is, the government will pay you 20% of it. How's that? Is that about right? It takes the burden off of the lower brackets by having a family exemption so that a family of four earning $25,500 pays no taxes at all. It eliminates the loopholes and the tax shelters, so the wealthy will pay tax unless it's all interest income. By taxing all income at the source, there's no need for capital gains or interest or dividend taxation. And it eliminates all the tax shelters and credits for corporations also and businesses with a 20% flat rate. And it eliminates 12,000 pages of IRS regulations where there's social engineering trying to give a tax credit for this or a depletion allowance for that to try to have economic conduct based upon taxes as opposed to what is the most productive. It is calculated to lower interest rates by 2%, raise the gross national product by $2 trillion over 7 years. Now, since you asked me about that, I want to show you the other chart, which contrasts an Arlen Specter presidency against a Bill Clinton presidency. If I may do this without too much objection, this is the chart that my staff made on the Clinton health care plan. When I read the president's plan, I was amazed by the number of agencies, boards, and commissions. So I asked for a list, and I want everybody to see this. My staff made me a chart. Every box in red is a new agency, board, or commission, and there are 105 of them. And every box in green is an existing bureau, which is given a new job. Bob Woodward of the Washington Post says that this chart was the critical psychological breakpoint in defeating the Clinton health care plan. And when the president made his State of the Union speech in January of 1994 and made health care the center of it, I was called by the national television studios and told they wanted my chart, and I got very excited. I speculated about what shirt I'd wear and what tie and what suit. And then I found out they didn't want me, just my chart. And Senator Dole got to use my chart. And of all the people who would get to use the chart, I minded Bob's using it the least. Bob and I, some of you may know, come from the same little town in Kansas, Russell, Kansas. It's a small town on the windswept plains of Kansas, halfway between Denver and Kansas City, has 4,998 people. Used to have 5,000 till Dole and I left town. Bob's father, Doran Dole, ran the grain elevator and had the scale in town, and my father, Harry Specter, ran a junkyard, and we weighed our junk on the Dole scale. And well, the question is, was it fair weight? It was fair weight, and everything about Bob Dole is fair and equitable. I have a very high regard for him, and tonight I want to make some news by endorsing Bob Dole for re-election as the Majority Leader of the United States Senate. He is an extraordinary Majority Leader, and we cannot lose him from that position. When the Clinton health care plan did a nosedive right after Senator Dole's speech, he was very confident that his speech had done it. Of course, I knew better. It was my chart.
We'll make one more round, maybe.
Senator Specter, my name is Clayton Chan. I'm a student.
Yes, sir.
I'm a student at the business school. Two questions for you. First question is in terms of the deficit reduction and budget. There's a lot of reports by the Congressional Budget Office that if we're going to really hit a balanced budget, true deficit reduction, we're going to have to address the issues of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and obviously Social Security is off the line, would you say, in terms of the accounting games. But in reality, we're going to have to address those three issues. As a candidate for the president, what specific action, tough decisions you are going to make to recommend to the American public to balance our budget? Secondly, in terms of another hot issue is in terms of politics, affirmative action. A lot of candidates indicate they want to study the issue. President Clinton is at this point, trying to look at how to balance different parties. I'd like to ask you your specific action you would take also on affirmative action, especially in light of your increased awareness, understanding of the Anita Hill issue, and what specific actions you would take for affirmative action.
With respect to the problem of discrimination in America, there is a lot of it, and I think it has to be dealt with an effective EEOC, Equal Opportunities Employment Commission, which now has a 93,000 case backlog and cannot do a job. I think African Americans are discriminated against. I think that young women of Asian extraction are discriminated against trying to get into Berkeley. I don't believe in quotas. Similarly, I don't think you can have discrimination against white males, as there was in the Memphis firefighters case where there was discrimination when they were discharged. I think you have to have outreach, and I think there ought to be scholarships so that access to higher education does not depend on ability to pay. But my view is to attack discrimination head on. I was at a forum recently, maybe some of you saw it, on black entertainment television at Howard University from 10 to 12. I was the only candidate who would show up on either party. Reverend Jackson was there, and it was a very, very distinguished panel, and I discussed this matter at some length for some 2 hours. On the question of the entitlements, Medicare, Social Security, I'll give you a very direct answer. I think that Social Security should be in a trust fund. Those funds are contributed by the employee and by the employer for purpose of paying when you reach 65 or 62 at the option, and I think they ought to be segregated. And I think that the invasion of that trust fund is really a fraudulent conversion. I used to prosecute people for that when I was district attorney. On Medicare and Medicaid, I think there are tremendous savings possible through managed care. It has to be done right, but I think we can save a lot of money. And I voted for Domenici Nunn on going after entitlements. And I believe that the American people want to have the deficit reduced and the budget balanced by the year 2002, and I think Americans are prepared to have cuts if they are fair. If there's leadership out of the White House that what is being done is fair, that they will take it. A week ago today, I was in Vermont, answered a question on a radio show from a Vermont farmer about dairy subsidies, and I said, we're going to have to cut dairy subsidies. I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but that's what we have to do, and that applies to my state, Pennsylvania, as well as Vermont. And what we have to do is expand the economy and open up overseas markets through GATT and NAFTA and through a flat tax. But we're going to have to deal with the deficit in a tough way. And Senator Domenici is the most knowledgeable person in Washington on this subject. And he's going to have a plan as chairman of the Budget Committee, which will be very specific on the precise cuts which will balance the budget by the target year 2002.
Follow-up question, if I can, on the
I think we're going to make it one more time around there, and then we're going to have to call it an evening.
Hi, Senator Specter. My name is Willie J. I'm managing editor of the Harvard Salient, the conservative biweekly, and I'm a fellow Jewish conservative. But I'd like to ask a question that's probably associated more with the religious right. You, in your announcement speech, please tell me if I misquote you, you said you wanted to get people out of people's pockets, off their backs, and out of their bedrooms. Did I get that right?
You got it exactly right. Barry Goldwater said that, and I quoted him.
Sorry. And the religious right would probably add to that the issue of gun control, which has become a particularly hot topic lately in light of the Oklahoma bombing. And I'm curious to hear your views on that in light of your professed libertarianism.
I have always been opposed to gun control because I think that it does not get guns out of the hands of criminals. And I would like to spend as much time and energy as we could on dealing with the criminal element. I wrote the Armed Career Criminal Bill that was passed in 1984, which provides for up to a life sentence for a career criminal, someone who's been convicted of 3 or more violent crimes found with a firearm. I do believe that we can limit guns by tracing them in the hands of criminals back to their source. And the quotation you made is an accurate one. When I quoted Senator Goldwater saying we ought to get the government off our backs, less regulation, out of our pocketbooks, lower taxes, and out of our bedrooms with choice. And I got a very strong letter of encouragement from Senator Goldwater. It wasn't quite an endorsement, but it was good enough so that the Philadelphia Daily News ran a big headline, Berries for Arlen.
Senator Specter, my name is Matthew Baczynski. I'm a graduate student at the School of Education. And my question may be a little bit less germane, but I don't have an opportunity to talk with you very often. And I did desperately want to ask you this question, which is, do you think that the single bullet theory has been discredited? And what were your comments, what was your reaction to Oliver Stone's movie JFK?
Anybody have any plans for the balance of the night? The single bullet theory is correct, and it has been upheld by all of the major studies. And I haven't had that question since this morning when I was on the Larry Williams show here in Boston. And let me give it to you briefly, but I'm not running from that or from any other question. The evidence was that the bullet entered between 2 large strap muscles, the president's neck, struck nothing solid, sliced his trachea, went through his pleural cavity, nicked his thigh, and the bullet that entered Governor Connally was slightly to the left of his right armpit with a little yaw consistent with the bullet traversing the president as I described it, and it exited the governor's chest slightly below the right nipple with a diameter of about 4 inches so that it was tumbling with a large wound of exit and consistent with going through his wrist and lodging in his thigh. And truth is stranger than fiction. We did a very expansive set of tests. And the people who have challenged it on the basis of the shirt where they say the hole was lower, so the bullet would have to have gone up instead of down. But it is not where the hole is on the shirt, it's where it is on the president's body. And the president was wearing a back brace, and he was waving, and his shirt rode up. And that's why the bullet hole was where it was on the shirt, because the shirt was on that part of his body higher. And then many have challenged the x-rays of the governor's wrist where it showed many fragments at various levels of the wrist. And Dr. Gregory testified before the commission, and I questioned him, with the x-rays showing that the metallic fragments were of postage stamp weight, consistent with having come from the bullet which was found on the stretcher, where consistent coming within the range of 158 to 161 grams. The House of Representatives investigation raised some questions about the conspiracy and the acoustic evidence, but said the single bullet theory was correct. The extensive investigation conducted by National Public Television with Walter Cronkite upheld it, and so have all the other serious studies. And as to Oliver Stone's movie, I didn't even think it was very good fiction.
Thank you. This will be the last.
Senator, I'm Baird Waring, a graduate of Harvard way back in the early 50s, and a Barry Goldwater conservative, so I guess that makes me a living oxymoron. I would like to bring up a subject that has, for some reason, evaded everything tonight, and this is the plight of the disadvantaged inner-city populations in the United States. I happen to be involved with a foundation that's addressing this, or hopefully addressing this. But I see an awful lot of terribly dedicated, highly motivated people working very hard to help the very young, the very poor, the very disadvantaged. You can go on and list them all. But I see no relevancy coming from government at any level. We pass laws at the federal level, we pass laws at the state level, the mayors send out edicts, but by the time the dollars and the people get down to the neighborhoods, there's nothing left. These people really need an awful lot of help. They're highly motivated, they're totally dedicated to improving, to cleaning up their neighborhoods, to getting rid of the crack dealers, to opening small retail stores. There's lots of good, highly motivated people involved, but there is no government effort that ever actually reaches them. All the rhetoric is there in Washington and on Beacon Hill, but it never gets to Codman Square, to Eggleston Square. That's in Boston.
Or to North Philadelphia.
Or North Philadelphia.
Or to Center City, Pittsburgh.
That's right.
Or to Harrisburg or Erie.
Why is it?
Let's get some
Why
Pennsylvania
is it that
towns in
government is so totally incapable of doing something that actually ends up doing what they said it was going to do?
Well, when you talk about help for the cities, there's a lot of indifference in Washington. Washington has pretty much given up on the cities of America. Well, okay, I'm prepared to agree with you on that. Jack Kemp was a loud voice for the cities.
Last one.
No, Arlen Specter has been too.
Second to last one.
Thank you. I'm the only big city Republican senator that there is, and I've introduced legislation which was crafted by the League of Cities and written in its final form by Mayor Ed Rendell of Philadelphia, a very fine mayor, a Democrat, and I gave him his first job out of law school, and he attended a breakfast for me recently in Philadelphia and said it looks as if he's a Democrat and he's for President Clinton, but he said it looks as if we may have a Republican president, and if that is to happen, it ought to be Arlen Specter. And that's partly because of what I've done on the issue of the cities. And I've taken Rendell's proposal and put it in a legislative form. Senator Carol Mosley Braun and I have co-sponsored it. And what it does is no extra expenses, because we're not going to get more expenses. But when you need a new federal building for GSA, it ought to be located in an empowerment zone or an enterprise zone.
Excuse me, Senator. I totally believe you, and I know you're sincere and serious. My question really was not what you would do, but why is it that this has never happened before? And obviously, as a solo person, you can't do it. It requires a whole lot more people and a much larger motive.
Well, I could do it as president.
Okay. Good luck, sir.
And there are some some efforts being made at it. I think we can meet the balanced budget deadline of the year 2002. But I think we have to do it with the scalpel and not a meat axe. And the House of Representatives sent over a rescission package of $17.3 billion, which we met in the Senate, but differently. My subcommittee, and I have the subcommittee which has authority over the Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Labor, was cut $5.9 billion, which was way out of proportion. And I took the lead in reducing that figure to $3.05 billion and put back money in on low energy fuel assistance, which is principally a problem for the city. It's amazing how many, it's a big issue in New Hampshire, amazing how many of my colleagues who didn't have any concern for it in the old days are now for it. But it's a big problem for the North, and people who earn less than $8,000 get 70% of the lie heat money. And there's an expression, it's heating or eating, which rhymes but happens to be true. And we have taken into account some of the city's interests, and we need to do more. And there's a program now coming up called City Vote, where there will be a straw ballot in big cities in America. Boston is one of them. A forum will be monitored by Bill Moyer of candidates. And I'm going to be working very hard for that vote. They're going to have all the names on the ballot, Clinton and Dole and Arlen Specter. And I think I have a great opportunity on the city vote. And I talked about that in the press conference in Boston here earlier today. And if you can get your cover on the picture on the cover of Time magazine for winning the Iowa caucus, think what you could do by winning the city vote. Stay tuned. Thank you.
I know you join me in thanking Senator Specter for the straightforwardness and frankness of his views and for getting us off to a terrific start. Thank you very much. Now, are you heading off in the morning?
Yeah.
It's great of you to come. I really do
Oh,
appreciate it.
I'm glad to do it. You got a terrific school, and I am a great admirer of the candidate.